So if we want to make lower impact and leave a better future, right, then we got two options. Either we have to dig a hole in the garden and jump in it, right? And I haven't seen anyone doing that. I haven't seen anyone who wants to, end it all and give up, or to give up their phone or their computer or the internet or anything, right? So our responsibility is to have a nice life, but to make choices which cause the least harm, right? And the only way that we can do that is the life cycle analysis, because that's been used for decades. Every company and government uses it, and these are all published and they're for free.
So welcome back to NutriCosmetics 2030 Sustainable Beauty Inside Out live event. I'm Matitz Batagel, your host for today. I'm a business strategist currently working as a marketing advisor at Tosla NutriCosmetics, as well as the co-host of the NutriCosmetics 2030 show. So we often hear that, let's say, one thing is greener than the other, more sustainable than the other. There is a lot of sensationalism. But the question is, like, what is the actual truth? How do you determine what is green, what is sustainable? And a question that's very frequent is plastic really the biggest villain in the world? So for this last conversation of today's event, we are joined with Dr. Chris DeArmitt to get to the bottom of these questions, as Dr. DeArmit is considered one of the top plastic materials experts and problem solvers in the world, which is why companies like HP, Apple, P&G, iRobot, Eaton, Total, and even Disney come to him for help. In 2016, he published the book Innovation Abyss, which reveals the true reasons for innovation failure and the proven path to success. And of course, in 2020, Dr. DeArmit also published a book called The Plastics Paradox, the first comprehensive scientific overview of plastic materials and the environment, covering all topics, including waste, litter, microplastic, degradation, ocean plastics, and more. Chris has also a multitude of granted patents, as well as numerous articles, book chapters, encyclopedia chapters, and conference presentations to his name. He's an award-winning keynote speaker educating global audiences on plastic materials and the environmental effects on plastic. Dr. DeArmit, welcome and thank you for joining us. This was a long introduction, I know.
Thank you. You've done a tremendous job today moderating. I really respect that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, before we start our conversation with Dr. DeArmit, if you have any questions, please submit them directly into the chat box. We'll take some time to answer them, but without further ado, let's get into this, because I'm very excited about this conversation. And when I was preparing for this interview, I watched some of your previous talks and videos. And I have a lot of questions, but let's start with this. You said that you got into this not because of your particular worry about the environment, but because you couldn't take it anymore, that your kids are presented with the wrong facts. Yes. So what is the actual truth? Yeah. What is green in your opinion?
That's the funny thing. I'm an expert now on plastics and the environment, but that's not actually my job. As you said, I'm a scientist, right? I don't make plastics. I don't sell plastics. I don't market plastics. I'm just a scientist. It's my job to understand plastics. And my kids came home from school, my two daughters, and they have been told that plastics don't degrade. And that is just a lie, right? I pay a lot of taxes to send my kids to a good school. And then they come home and they've been taught clear lies by their teachers. And another teacher told them to buy a metal straw, right? And that's also wrong. So for that reason, I got angry. And you have to be very angry to write a book, because if you write a science book, you have to go and find the science. You have to make yourself read things that you're not even interested in. So I read 4,000 scientific studies. Like I'm not talking about industry studies. I'm talking about really, really boring studies from universities, all about metal and paper and glass and litter and microplastics and whales and turtles and dolphins and everything. And then I made this book, The Plastics Paradox. And here it is. This is what it looks like. If it will show up on the screen, I don't know. But anyway, so I made this book, and the book is free in 5 languages. So people assume that I'm here to sell a book. I'm not here to sell any product. I'm giving away all the information for free because people at the moment, people who care, are making choices 100% certain to increase harm because they don't have the facts. And I've seen that even today. I've seen people today even say things which are completely contradicted by science. And so they're making choices which are making things much, much worse for no reason. So that's why I'm sharing everything. It's free in the book. It's free on the website. It's free in the videos so that people can have, it's like a map, right? It's like a map to how do we have a better future. And the way to do that is to know where everything is and what the facts are.
Yeah. So let's get a little bit deeper into the facts. So when I was studying your work, I read a lot about the life cycle analysis, energy consumptions, all the science behind it. And can you talk a little bit more about that? And so we understand it, because as you said, there are a lot of different opinions that are sold as like the definitive truths around.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I made a note about that listening today. And I made a note, it says, opinions differ, but the facts do not. The results from, if you look at the facts, are clear and consistent. So the only way, you asked several times, people, how do you define sustainability? And the only way to define that and the only way to measure it is a life cycle analysis. So if we want to make lower impact and leave a better future, right, then we got 2 options. Either we have to dig a hole in the garden and jump in it, right? And I haven't seen anyone doing that. I haven't seen anyone who wants to, end it all and give up, or to give up their phone or their computer or the internet or anything, right? So our responsibility is to have a nice life, but to make choices which cause the least harm, right? And the only way that we can do that is the life cycle analysis, because that's been used for decades. Every company and government uses it. And these are all published and they're for free. They come from universities. It's a standardized approach. It tells you the whole impact. So it tells you the amount of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, other greenhouse gases, tells you about fossil fuel usage and water usage and effects on lakes and rivers, tells you even about litter and waste and things like that. So it basically adds up the whole impact of a product. And it's not by material, it's by a product. So you will look at, let's say, a cosmetics container or a Coke bottle or a car, and you look at all the different options you have, you measure scientifically using well-established databases, which everyone agrees on and has been developed for decades. So they're all very, very solid. Everyone's using the same data. And using that method, you can work out what causes the least impact. And so what frustrates me is that this data is already there and nobody's checking it. I've literally seen people, even today, who call themselves an expert, who have clearly not read one scientific article to check the facts. They're out claiming to be an expert, telling people what to do, and they're telling people things which are just wrong because they haven't done their homework. They should be ashamed.
And if everything is so accessible and free, as you mentioned, why do you think there is still so much confusion here?
Because there's many things happening, right? So you always have to follow the money. If you want to understand why something is not going logically, look at the money. Who is profiting, right? So there's plenty of people trying to sell you products, right? That's why I'm very careful to give away my book and I don't sell any plastics or anything, right? I'm just an expert scientist. So people are trying to sell you things and they will say anything to sell you things, right? I saw a company today called Notpla and they won some award, right? And when you go to their website, they're claiming that they're green and there's not one single piece of evidence that I can find anywhere on their website, right? So there's too many companies trying to profit from this. And there's also too many green groups, right? So if you look at, here's a book. This is a book by the former president of Greenpeace. It's called, if I can make it show up on the screen here. Yeah, there it is. It's called Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, right? So this was the president of Greenpeace. He left and said that they are just telling you lies for donations. That is literally their business, according to him, not to save the environment. They've abandoned the environment years and years ago. Their job now, according to their former president, is to tell you lies to make money. And he says that the other green groups, many of them are doing the same thing. And that's why people need an independent, unpaid advisor who can just give them the information for free. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and because this, as I said before, this constant question that pops up in my head all the time throughout these conversations today. It's like, what is sustainable? But as you said, we have definitions. We know the data is already there, right?
Right. And the amazing thing is, right, everyone has Google. Amazon has just, for example, they've moved away from that white and blue bag that they would send things in. That's a mailer envelope. They've moved away from that. They've replaced it just now with paper. There are 5 studies on mailer envelopes in the world. You can literally type into your Google now, LCA mailer. That's how I find these things, right? I find peer-reviewed studies. I don't ask Google for the answer, right? I use Google to find the studies, right? So you go in, you can type in life cycle mailer, and you will find 5 studies like I did. Every study ever done in the world says that the paper mailer is much worse for the environment than the plastic one. More fossil fuel, more greenhouse gas, more water, more pollution, more litter. Worse in every way you can measure, according to every single study done by universities and places all around the world. So they really have no excuse. I mean, these people who call themselves experts and they can't find 30 seconds to type in life cycle bag, life cycle study, life cycle straw. I mean, any person, even my kids, can find this information in 10 seconds and read it. And no one's doing it. They're out there telling us what to do and they haven't done their homework.
Yeah. And one really cool thing that I saw in one of your talks, it was talking about, like, let's say plastic bags are a big problem because they're big and they're visually like not nice to see at. But you pointed out, like, a plastic bag, like, it's actually, like, in volume of plastic is really, really low, right?
Yeah, yeah. There's a few things about plastic bags. So if you look for life cycle studies on bags, there are 30. Every one ever done says the plastic bag causes less harm. And it weighs 6 grams. The ones in my supermarket weigh 6 grams. The paper bag weighs 60 grams. They degrade at the same speed. The plastic bag is cheaper, greener, degrades at the same speed. There's no reason to pick the paper bag. And people are picking the paper bag or the cotton bag and increasing harm because they didn't do their homework. The other thing to say about plastic bags is that they make no difference to anything. There was a study in Europe where they interviewed thousands of people. And it turns out people are only interested in straws and plastic bags because they want to feel good about themselves. They want to say, hey, I care about the planet. I care about the plastic bags and the turtles. There's no effect from plastic bags or from straws. The things that can actually help the environment, according to science, are driving less, flying less, and eating less red meat. Those are the 3 things that would do 1,000 times more for the environment than anything you can ever do with a bag or a straw. But people don't want to make those sacrifices. So instead, they talk about bags and straws that make no difference because they don't want to make an actual sacrifice. They just want to pretend to be good people. And that frustrates me as well.
I see that there's a lot of things that frustrates you, but, like, what I would like to focus on right now is, because we were talking a lot, even in the previous conversations, about plastic and waste and recycling in particular.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What's your take on waste and recycling? Because
Yeah.
I saw that once you said that, or you questioned, like, why do we focus on the 10% of our problem? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
That is exactly right. We've got plastics under a microscope and we're talking about plastics all day long. And we really shouldn't do that. We should really zoom out and look at the whole picture, because the only way to solve a problem is to look at the whole picture, right? So if you look at our use of materials, plastics are 0.5% of the materials we use by weight and less than 1% by volume. Plastics are less than 1% by weight and volume of all the material of the waste we create as well. Plastics are responsible for less than 1% of the carbon dioxide, right? And the overall harm, less than 1%. So we're ignoring 99% of our problem, which means we're certain to fail. There is no way we can make any change to the environment if we obsess over 1% of it and ignore the other 99% of impact. And that's what we're doing now. And that's what's really unfortunate. People are obsessing over something that can never make a difference. Imagine your house was on fire, right? And you call the fire brigade and he comes with a big fire hose, right? And he's ready to shoot it at your house and save your house. And instead he sees somebody smoking a cigarette. And he says, no, I want to put out that fire first. Let me put out the cigarette. I'm going to leave your house burning. I'm going to put out this cigarette over here. That's more important. And that's what we're doing now. We're so distracted with plastics. And don't get me wrong, plastics have an impact. They have an impact of less than 1%. So it's not like I'm denying that plastics have an impact, but what I'm saying is that as long as we ignore metal and concrete and wood, which have the other 99% of the impact, we'll never really make a difference. In fact, we'll waste all of our policy making decisions, we'll waste all of our money, we'll waste all of our mental effort and make no difference at all. We'll just fail.
We'll touch on like what are your opinions on like better materials and better approaches, but I would like to stay with waste a little bit more, because we often hear that waste, and in particular plastic waste, is increasing. Is that true or not?
All materials are increasing. So you always hear that plastics are increasing and they're going to double by 2060 or something. The green groups love to tell you that. But what they don't tell you is that every material is increasing at 3 or 4% a year because there's more people and we're getting richer, right? So there's more metal. Plastic is growing at the same exact rate as metal and glass and wood and paper and cement, every other material. So it's an absolute distraction and an absolute deception to tell you that plastics are bad because they're growing at the same rate. And when you talk about waste, that's an important topic. If you look at that, scientists have looked at waste and they found that plastics have massively reduced waste. And why is that true, right? Because when plastics were growing, the use of other materials was going down because plastics were replacing metal and glass and concrete. So and you can check this yourself, this has been scientifically proven, but you can check it yourself in the kitchen. Go and weigh a plastic bag, then weigh a paper bag, then weigh a cotton bag. Take a plastic straw, less than a gram. Take a paper straw, 2 grams. Take a glass straw, 20 grams. Take a metal straw, 30 grams, whatever the numbers are, right? 1 pound of plastic or 1 kilo of plastic replaces 3 or 4 kilos of other material on average. So scientists have measured this, and the total waste generation and the waste going to landfill is much lower now that we have plastic than it was before. And so people are also distracted about that and misled about that. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I was thinking about this, because like I live part of the year I live in Slovenia, some parts of the year I live in France. And when I'm in France, I'm in Alsace, the eastern part, which is like kind of German-like, and like you don't see a lot of waste or like plastics, on the side of the road. But like I also like to go a lot to the south of Italy. And let's say you go to Bari and you see a lot of waste, and not waste, litter around. So is this maybe the problem, that like litter like makes us think that like waste is a big problem?
Yeah. So the thing about litter is that it varies very much geographically. So people will always show you these beaches in Indonesia with tons of litter. And that's because people in certain parts of the world drop their litter on the ground, or they dump it. They literally put truckloads of stuff in the river, right? And then they complain that there's junk on the beach because it came from the river. So that's the funny thing. The countries that generate the most waste are Europe and America and so forth, but they're not mismanaging the waste. They're putting it in landfills. It's not getting into the rivers. It's not getting into the oceans, and that's been measured. So why do the green groups want us to feel guilty when we're not the ones creating the problem? And the answer is simple. You can't go to some guy in a hut in Africa and say, give me all your money, you're generating too much litter, because that person doesn't have any money. So that's why the green groups are always trying to make people in Europe and people in America and Canada feel guilty about waste and litter, even though we're not responsible, because we have the money and they want it. And they're very successful with it. So the ways to, one thing I've noticed is, if you take the time to understand a problem, that's my job, is to understand problems and solve them. If you really take thousands of hours like I did and really understand the facts, the solutions are obvious. There are scientific studies on litter, and the way you solve litter is education, deposits, and fines. That's what works. It's known, it's scientifically proven. Everyone's talking about it all day long on LinkedIn and here and there, and they're having discussions, but the scientists already know the answer and no one's talking about it. So in places like, for example, Norway has a deposit on PET bottles, and 97% are returned. They're recycled more than 10 times each, and it's extremely green. So PET bottle, according to Life Cycle, is the greenest solution already, even if you don't recycle it. And every time you recycle it, it gets greener and greener and greener.
Okay, that's a very interesting fact. And but I would like to address another elephant in the room. What about microplastics?
Yeah, that's really a mystery, because people say plastics are bad because they degrade to give, smaller and smaller particles. And just think about that for a minute. What happens when a rock degrades, right? It breaks into pieces and forms gravel, and then that forms sand, and then that forms dust. What happens when a leaf degrades, right? That's another kind of solid. It degrades into smaller and smaller particles. You can crush it in your hand. It forms dust as well. What happens when a piece of glass degrades? It breaks into pieces. And so we've been tricked. People are literally saying plastics are bad because they break into smaller particles, when every single solid we know does the exact same thing. How has anyone been so stupid to think that plastics are bad because they become smaller and smaller particles when every solid does it, right? So that's completely illogical and it doesn't make sense. We've been tricked. And then the question would be, well, if it does break into smaller particles like rocks and everything else, is it dangerous? And that has been measured too. This has been measured for decades and decades. There are hundreds or thousands of studies on this, and plastic is as safe as clay or cellulose, which is what plants are made of, right? So green groups again have rebranded plastic dust and called it microplastic to make it sound scary. But if you look at all the science, most of the scientific studies show that it's not harmful, the vast majority, and even the ones that do claim to show harm are just rubbish science. You can literally prove that those scientific studies are nonsense. They use like 1 million times more plastic than is actually in the environment. They use a kind of plastic that doesn't even exist in the environment, so no one's exposed to it. They even soak the plastic in poison to get a bad result. So that's how incompetent the studies are that show harm. Meanwhile, the vast majority of studies show that it's just as safe as other particles. So it's another case where we're focused on something which is safe, and there are actually serious dangers with dust, right? There's lead, there's mercury, there's cadmium, there's quartz, which causes cancer. Wood dust also causes cancer. And no one's interested in the parts of dust which are proven to kill you, right? Nobody's interested in that. They're so busy obsessing over plastic, which is 0.001% of the dust we inhale is plastic, tested and proven to be safe. And that's what we're focused on, while ignoring huge amounts of things which are known to be dangerous.
And here I come back to my question. I had this question before, is like, why so much manipulation? And maybe also like, how does it happen? Because right now, if I go ask 10 people randomly here in the streets, what the biggest environmental problem is, they're gonna all say, or like 9 out of 10, they're gonna say plastic.
Yeah.
How did this happen?
Well, if you read this book from the Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, this is by the former president of Greenpeace. And he literally says, sorry, it doesn't show up because of the screen blanker, I guess, but he literally says this attack on plastic is complete nonsense. They just made it up to make themselves rich, according to the former president of Greenpeace. They started criticizing PVC, and people went with it. And these guys have got hundreds of millions of dollars by scaring people and saying things which, according to their own president, aren't true. So unfortunately, it's a business for them. They have huge marketing teams. They're making hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you're a scientist like me and you tell the truth is boring. Nobody wants to hear the truth. It doesn't scare anyone, right? If you tell people plastics are safe, that's not a news headline. The reporters won't even look at the truth because it's not as interesting as the lies are.
Yeah. So I had a conversation the other day about a clinical study on one of the products that we were doing with a professor who actually led the clinical study. And she said that the most important thing for the academia is credibility. But here we see that there's a lot of misinformation that is backed by science, basically, or at least it's said that it's backed by science. But as you say, it's a lot of bad science. So why so much bad science behind it?
So in general, I would say the scientists are correct. So if I look at microplastics, the vast majority of papers show no harm and the science is okay. Microplastics is the area with the most bad science of any of the areas I've checked. But if you look at litter and the waste and the life cycle analyses, so for example, if you look at 30 on bags, 29 say plastic is best, and the other one says paper is best. But when you look at that one, it's faked. They cheated, right? And the way you can tell that is you send it to a life cycle analysis, expert, and they look at them all and tell you this one they haven't made the correct assumptions. So that gives you an idea, right? So in the microplastics area, maybe 1 in 4 papers is incompetent, and those people shouldn't even be called scientists. The science is so bad, it's just terrible. So for example, the World Wildlife Fund did a study, and they said that we eat a credit card of plastic a week. And everyone's heard that. We eat a credit card of plastic a week. The latest study, not funded by them, said it would take more than 20,000 years to eat a credit card of plastic. That's how bad the first science was. 20,000 years versus 1 week. So in general, the scientists get it right. But again, they are paid. That one study was paid for by the World Wildlife Fund. And then you can ask yourself, is that why it was so wrong? So scientists are not perfect. And the number one thing for scientists is not credibility. It's a rating. The more things funding, getting money, and publishing a lot of papers, those are the 2 main things for scientists, not credibility in general.
So I also remember one story you told. I don't remember the context exactly, but someone took an information that was used in a school paper or something by a 9-year-old boy, right?
Yeah.
And it became public knowledge.
Yeah, that was Milo Kress, a 9-year-old schoolboy, said that Americans use 450 million straws a day. And when they asked him, and the New York Times covered that, the Washington Post, the USA Today, all the major news outlets, CNN, I think, covered it. It's in my book. All of the news agents covered it, and it wasn't true. He had no evidence for that, just made up. And so this is how desperate reporters are now. They don't check anything. There was a study last month, or a few months ago, an organization called Beyond Plastics said that plastic pipes are not safe for drinking water and we should all be drinking out of copper pipes. And it was complete nonsense. But the reporters covered it because it was scary, and they accept anything that comes from a group that pretends to be green. And then I showed them the facts, and the facts, and the reporter was shocked. She was absolutely horrified when I showed her how she'd been tricked into publishing things that weren't true. So she published an update to the article, a new article showing the truth. Yeah. But that's rare. Usually the reporters don't care about the truth. They just go with the nonsense.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. Do they correct themselves usually? Because I'm sure that you point it out often.
About 1 time in 20. About 5% of the time, the reporter actually will look at the evidence and correct themselves. The BBC corrected themselves. They had a turtle with a bag around its neck, and I said, that's a photoshopped image. Here's the original. You're misleading the public. Please change it. And I said, your data's wrong too. And they changed the data and they changed the image. So, but that's rare.
Okay. So now I would like to shift the gears a little bit, because up until now, we were talking a lot about the facts and like how there is a lot of misinformation and how things are wrong. But now I would like to focus a little bit on the other side. So in your opinion, how do we start preventing this? And then also, like, what are, in your opinion, the better practices, the better solutions?
Yeah. So in every case, we need to look at the numbers and pick the option that causes least harm. That's easy to do in most cases. If you don't have a life cycle study, I heard some of your panelists asking about people whether they would pay more for a green solution. Almost every time, the cheapest solution is the greenest. Because if you look at, which is great news for the public, right? We've got a recession coming. And we've got inflation where people's money is not worth as much. So this is great news for the public. If you look at a correlation between environmental impact and cost, the worst things for the environment are platinum, palladium, and gold. They're terrible for the environment, terrible for pollution, terrible for greenhouse gas. They're incredibly expensive. They're always recycled and never thrown away. And if you look on the other end of that line, you have things like polyethylene, which are very, very green, very, very cheap, and not recycled as much because you can't make as much money doing it. So that's what I would say. You should always look at the facts. And if you don't have the facts, buy the cheapest or the lightest solution, the one that uses less material. That's what I would advise.
Yeah, that's a bit of a heretic point of view of, like, if you look at the general thinking.
Yeah, and I can prove it. I mean, I can literally give you a graph of cost versus greenhouse gas, and you'll see a straight line. So every single thing I say is not just an opinion. I mean, you can go to my website, you can look at the videos. Every single statement is made with citations in my work where it's copied and pasted with no spin and always with references to many scientific studies to prove every single point. So, yeah, that's something that proper scientists do.
Okay, and now we also have a question from the audience, from Jimena Martinez. And the question goes, so what about the waste that European countries ship to developing countries? I agree that green groups want to gild their way into getting money from Europe and the US. However, developing countries manufacture most of the products from European US companies, which does make them partially for the waste. Not to mention the countries that actually send in ships their waste to other countries that can't properly manage it. So how
yes, I have heard about that, but I don't have the numbers because those numbers are like on import, export statistics, and I don't even know where to find them. I do know that's been made illegal. So people just ship any material that shouldn't go is just shipped back again. That's my understanding. So I know there are new laws on that. I know that it did happen. I don't know how much it's happening now. But if you think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right, to send material elsewhere. It costs money to ship it and so forth. So I don't think that can be a really major problem just because of the economics of it. But again, I can't be sure because I don't have the numbers.
Okay. And then we have more questions coming, so we'll focus on the attendees questions. So it's an anonymous question, but first, Dr. DeArmit, thank you for this. I am an environmentalist, and I totally agree with you. But there is also one brief question: is our PET the future? What are material limitations, or is virgin PET safer? Thank you.
Oh, great question. Yeah, so as I said, that usually plastic is the greenest solution. So if you look at 50 or 100 life cycle studies, I've never seen paper or metal or glass or cotton beat plastic. If you look at plastics, and when you recycle it, it gets even greener. So you save 80% of the energy and the CO2 if you recycle it. So it's even greener than the virgin was. So yeah, recycled PET is a great material. It's not always the greenest material, though. So PET is the greenest material for Coke bottles, right? Coca-Cola, Pepsi, carbonated drinks. That's the greenest material. But if you have something that's not carbonated, so just milk or water, then polyethylene is greener and polypropylene are greener than PET. So yeah, recycled PET has a great future, along with polyolefins. If you combine polyethylene, polypropylene, and PET, and you recycle them, those are the greenest solutions for most things.
Yeah, and probably also from the recycling point of view, because I remember another interesting fact that I don't know where I heard it. It was from you, that in the recycling process, basically plastic is the easiest to do because you don't need so much energy. For instance, I often heard like aluminum is the most sustainable packaging solution because you can recycle it indefinitely and stuff like this. But then basically you pointed out something very interesting. To recycle metals, you have to make it like super hot, and that like only with the energy is not as sustainable anymore, right?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. When you look at the life cycle study, a big part of it is the energy, right? Because you have to burn fossil fuels usually to make the energy, and you have to give off CO2 when you're burning the fossil fuels. So if you look at glass, right, I have a picture in my book of glass. It's molten, right? It's glowing red hot like a volcano. That's how hot you have to get it, like 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, I think is the temperature, 1000 degrees Celsius. And then if you look at steel, it's the same thing. If you look at copper, it's the same thing. Aluminium has a lower melting point around 650 degrees Celsius and still 1000 Fahrenheit. If you look at things like polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, you're talking about 200 or 300 degrees, not thousands of degrees. So the energy is so much lower. And then when you look at recycling, it's the same thing, right? You still have to melt it. So again, you're melting the plastics and using much less energy to recycle it than you are with the metals. So I always think it's totally crazy to say we should take something which was awful in the first place, like aluminium, and recycle it and do the same harm again and again and again, right? It's totally illogical to spend the energy and burn the CO2 and the fossil fuel again and again to make these materials which are worse for the environment it's like two wrongs don't make a right, right? Repeating something bad doesn't make it a good idea, and it's expensive too. So and it's actually a lie to say that aluminium can be recycled indefinitely. There's books talking about that and saying no, there's waste, there's oxidation, there's dross, there's contamination with other things. It's just not true. And the same with glass.
Yeah. I have another question that I thought about now, and in one of the previous panels, it was said like sustainability, if you go for it, you have to go all the way. So you have to do it like 100%. Do you think that you can actually be 100% sustainable?
There's no such thing really until we have unlimited free energy from like a nuclear fusion, for example. There will never be total sustainability because every recycling process, every collection step has a cost, right? Even these people now, they're going up and down with ships trying to take plastic out of the ocean. And I'm pretty sure they're burning 10 tons of diesel fuel for every 1 ton of plastic that they're collecting, right? And creating huge amounts of black smoke, huge amounts of carbon dioxide, and they're getting paid millions of dollars to do this thing, which is increasing harm because they didn't look at the overall effects. So yeah, I think there's no such thing as 100% sustainable. You can just do your best to make good choices. And I will say one thing though, that if you do so you see often on LinkedIn and other places where I am, they do customer studies. And we heard from some of your panelists, right? If you ask the customer, they want paper, but the customer is wrong, right? That means that means companies have a choice. They can either listen to their customer and make them happy, charge them more because these solutions cost more, and increase harm, right? Or they can pick plastic, which is not what the customer wants, and decrease harm. So they have and save the customer money. So there's a problem there. And they even did a survey. They interviewed supermarket executives and they said to them, you're replacing plastic. Tell us more about that. And they said, yeah, actually that increases harm. And we know that it does, but our customers want it. So we do it anyway, even though we know it's bad. So that's a problem. If you lie to the customer, then the customer demands something which is bad. And that's where we are right now, because we haven't done a good enough job as a plastics industry of telling the truth, and neither have the reporters.
That's a very interesting, very, very interesting point of view, because like I know I come from like business strategies, product development and stuff like that, and they always taught us listen to the consumer. But this is actually a very important question. What if consumer actually is wrong? What if consumer doesn't have all the facts, right?
Right. And here's another thing. They always say that, so, people talk about plastic degradation. People are obsessed about plastic degradation. Plastics degrade really fast. I mean, about as fast as paper. And that's scientifically proven. If you drop a plastic bag, it's gone in less than a year, right? The global market for plastic stabilizers is $5 billion a year. Do you think companies will be paying $5 billion to stabilize plastics if they were stable? No, they put in just enough stabilizer to make it last as long as the customer needs it to last. If that's a plastic pipe in the ground, that might be 100 years. But if it's a plastic bag, they hardly pay for any stabilizer and it's gone in less than 1 year. So that's a lie. The real reason that people want things to degrade is they want to be pigs. They want to drop it on the floor and it's going to vanish like Harry Potter. That's why people are so obsessed about degradation. And here's the really ironic part. They've done studies, and if a customer thinks that something will degrade, they drop it more. There's more litter. So if you compare plastic and paper, you get twice as much litter with the paper product as you do with the plastic one, because the customer thinks the paper one's going to degrade. So they're always criticizing plastic for degradation. They're always criticizing it for litter. But if you switch to paper, you have no improvement in degradation and you get twice as much litter. And that's been studied and no one talks about it.
Yeah, and I know personally have been guilty of that, because like usually I have these big bags to go to the supermarket, but of course sometimes you forget and you have to buy a bag. And yeah, I've been buying paper bags like for years. But after hearing your point of view, I think I'm switching back to maybe trying to remember more to take the reusable bag, but maybe just take
the reusable one is the greenest. The reusable plastic one is the greenest one if you reuse it enough times. I think you have to reuse it 5 or 10 times for it to be greener. And but you don't. And the thing is about everything I say, none of the things I say are my work. People are always like, well, you work for the plastics industry. I'm citing hundreds or thousands of studies from universities, right? None of it's my work. None of it's paid for by the plastics industry. And you can go to my website and read these life cycle studies on bags yourself, right? So you don't have to believe my opinion about any of this. It's just, I'm just trying to present the evidence so that people who care can make good choices.
Yeah. So I know we've been like talking about a lot of things, but I think I would like to conclude our conversation with the question. And before you mentioned nuclear fusion as like, if we had that, that would be great. But is there any, you can talk a little bit more about that, but like also about maybe other things that you are excited about for the future that may not be there yet, but are coming.
Yeah. The thing that excites me most is that somebody should sue Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund and say, you lied to get my donations and I want my money back. That is the biggest single thing that would help the world, because we need people to be telling the truth so that the customers believe things that are true and we can make decisions that are sensible. That's my dream. Other things to say is that if you want to do something good, don't just pretend to be good. Do your homework, right? Being a good person means doing some work, not just pretending. And the other thing to say is that people like natural stuff, right? So people, they're against plastics because they come from fossil fuel. But most people are not aware. You can buy polyethylene and polypropylene and other polymers made from plants, right? You don't have to start with oil out of the ground. You can start with plant oil, and that works too. And it's on the market. You can buy it right now. It's been on the market for years, and most people still don't know that. So if you wanted to be green, pick polyethylene or polypropylene or PET and go and buy, go to the supplier and buy the green, the natural version, if that's what you want.
That's great. And I think if I can conclude this conversation, it would be something like, if you want to do better, first do your homework.
Right.
And
that's it.
Dr. DeArmit, thank you so much for this insightful conversation. It definitely changed some of my opinions about sustainability, and I'm sure some in the audience too. And I really hope we have another chance to continue this conversation, as I have a feeling that today we only like scratched the surface a little bit of your amazing work. So thank you.
That's right. Well, the good news is I condensed all of these thousands of studies onto one page, and I think they're going to share the link. So you don't have to be bored by reading the whole book. You can literally find out all of the facts in 5 minutes. So thank you, Matic, and thanks for all the people who invited me and cared enough to look at the evidence.
Thank you. And definitely this video of this conversation and the others will be published on YouTube, and we'll put all the necessary links for everyone to be able to access the information.
Wonderful.
So, Dr. DeArmit, thank you again for this beautiful conversation, and I hope for the next one.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you. And this, my dear audience and esteemed guests, is the conclusion of today's NutriCosmetics 2030 Sustainable Beauty Inside Out live event. I hope you enjoyed the conversations as much as I did, and thank you for your time, and I hope we see each other again in one of our next events. We don't have the exact plan for the future yet, but keep an eye on your inbox where we'll send you all the news. And in the meantime, don't forget to check our new NutriCosmetics 2030 show, as well as some of the old videos of our previous events. And of course, all the videos from today's events are also going to be available soon. You can find everything on YouTube and all streaming platforms. So thank you again for your time, for your participation, and see you the next time.